So I guess YouTube is just feeling like it needs a little chill out. Hi everyone, my name's Will Critchlow. I'm the founder and CEO at SearchPilot, and I do these live streams mainly every week, aiming to do them on a Tuesday at around this time, so 4:15 p.m. UK time, which is 11:15 a.m. East Coast time, 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast. And I've got a few things to talk about today. The bulk of it is around core updates and how that fits with SEO testing, but also just how I've been thinking about them more generally, what's going on, how to understand it, and how to operate in a world where Google is pushing out these, I think it's fair to say, pretty opaque updates. So if you've been at all active in SEO discussions over the last couple of months, you can't have missed the discussion of the big recent updates. And I'm just going to pull up a screen share as I talk about this because my ex-colleague, Tom Capper, has done a great Whiteboard Friday, which is a very good starting point explaining everything that's been going on recently. And I would recommend watching this. It's got some summaries in it as well. Tom talks as well about the site reputation abuse update that Google trailed and told everybody was coming before starting to roll it out in the last 24 hours or so. That's a little different. That's a manual update, as I understand it, targeting particularly large websites, especially media businesses that have rented out their subdomains or subfolders in attempts to rank for commercial terms that are somewhat unrelated to their core editorial content. And we've seen this go into action straight away. So we're recording this Tuesday afternoon, UK time, and at about this time yesterday, I started to see people talking about sites that had already been hit. And of course, because Google told us this was coming, some sites had preemptively taken down these site sections, no indexed or removed entirely the site sections. This is stuff like coupons, vouchers, those kinds of things, which were typically powered by completely separate third-party platforms and were not necessarily related to the core editorial position or content of the media site. We've seen many of these kind of white labeled things. We've seen jobs, you've seen dating. It's been classic. I've seen it for many years in the British media ecosystem. I'm sure it's the same across the English speaking world. And this has become a bigger problem, it seems, for Google. And they wanted people to know that they were going to take action. And so take action they've done. And Search Engine Land has a good article talking about some of the sites that they've already seen getting impacted, as well as people who have made proactive changes for themselves. So yeah, I think this is probably a pretty good briefing on the subject. As normal, I will be sending out all the links to the sites that I pull up while I'm talking here today. They will go on the Twitter thread along with the live stream and in the comments of the LinkedIn section. These streams go out on my Twitter and LinkedIn at Will Critchlow, as well as on the SearchPilot YouTube account. And yeah, you can find all the links afterwards. As I say, I'll tweet them out and put them in the LinkedIn comments section, as well as if you're interested in general in following along, if you head over to searchpilot.com/live, you can get other resources that are useful for everyone who's following these videos. You can fill in this form if you'd like to get a specific walkthrough demo of the SearchPilot platform, or just talk to one of our team about how to do SEO testing more effectively. And we've got links to a number of useful resources that you will find at the bottom here. So customer success stories, I recommend clicking on that link and checking these all out. And introduction to SEO testing, if you're new to the game and you want to know how it works, we've got a PDF with everything you need. You can share that with your boss. And tons of test results. So we publish our individual SEO test results every couple of weeks, and you can access the back catalog, as well as if you sign up to the email list, you'll get a new test result in your inbox every other week. Okay, so this update has, I don't know if it's finished rolling out, has at least started happening. And the whole thing, though, is a little bit interesting to me. This idea that they have been struggling with these sites kind of renting out their, domain authority. Again, Tom, in his blog post, Tom Capper, talked about how Google has hinted strongly, and then at times explicitly said over the years that they didn't think of things at a domain level, and they didn't have this kind of concept of a domain level signal, and certainly they didn't have something that looked like a concept of a domain authority. They've consistently claimed this over the years. I did once get John Muller to admit on the Search Love stage that they had something somewhat akin to this concept, but I don't think it's fair to say that that really stuck in Google's messaging. And what we've seen very much more consistently is that this is not a thing they do. But if they truly didn't, then they wouldn't need an update like this one, because I think this is the only reason that you might need an update like this is abuse of a concept of a domain authority. But anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic. What I really want to talk about today isn't manual updates like this one, but rather so-called core updates. And these capture both unnamed updates that happen periodically and appear to be somehow more batch than the more continuous reevaluation of ranking factors that we're more used to. And then as well, some named updates, like the recent helpful content update, which arguably affected this same kind of core and was done in the same kind of batch kind of way. And so, yeah, we've seen the helpful content update. We've seen related attacks from Google on content that Google has denoted as spam. And I think they all fall under the aegis of the things that I wanted to talk about today, which is these basically batch updates that come along from time to time, periodically, where it's not a continuous ranking factor or even a continuous tweaking of a ranking factor. It's some kind of retraining, some kind of batch update to the model. So we're going to call all of those things core updates, not things like the manual penalties that we've seen just recently, but we're going to include things like helpful content update and all of the unnamed core updates. And it is worth saying, even when they name them, that what Google says an update does is not necessarily what it actually does. It doesn't necessarily always exactly line up. So many small publishers, this is just one example of an article that I saw, that have been noting, I think is maybe the fairest way of saying this, noted that the net effect of some recent updates has been to demote smaller publishers, mainly in favor of sites like Reddit and Quora. And there's a lot of debate about what this means for search quality. I've touched on this in previous weeks. I'm not going to get deep into that today. Suffice to say, we can't take at face value the name of an update, and it's a little bit like those things that work their way through, I think probably all political systems, but the American political system seems particularly amenable to the name of the law, not necessarily mapping to the intent of the law, and I think that's probably something somewhat analogous here. So what I think is true, and I think is helpful to remember as we work through this, is that in general, obviously, I say obviously, no, let's cut out obviously. In general, I think these core updates are designed to move the algorithm further towards the kind of platonic ideal of search results that Google would like to see. The intention is broadly in that direction. But remember, we run SEO tests in large part because Google's algorithm is impenetrable. What we're trying to do at SearchPilot is we're trying to turn organic search into the measurable, accountable channel it really needs to be to stand shoulder to shoulder with channels that have historically received more management attention and greater investment. And we're still seeing organic search is the largest source of traffic, certainly the largest source of new customers to the vast majority of large sites that we see and work with. But there is a problem here. And the problem, as far as SEO testing is concerned, is that these core updates are batch processes. And I have my theories about why that is. I talk about that, I think, in this post here. So this is from last year, and I'm going to refer to this a little bit. But I have a theory that I tweeted about that the reason why recovery can take a while and why these are batch processes is that what is in fact going on is a retraining of a massive deep learning model. And it's really shaped this kind of, it's trained on the current web. And so you can't just tweak it 6 months later. You have to retrain it on the shape of the web at that point. And that this, in my opinion, is why this has become a batch process. But it's worth noting that this is unusual. So I think, again, I talked about this somewhere here, that core updates are pretty unusual right now for being batch processes. Almost everything else about how Google operates has become more and more real time over the years. Anyone who's been around the industry for long enough will remember that it used to be the case that the entire index was static and then only updated periodically. That was what was called the Google dance. More recently, link signals, PageRank, and so forth were updated in batch processes and then moved to continuous updates. Machine learning signals, such as content quality, so that's updates like Panda and Penguin, started out being updated periodically. And all of these things have moved to more continuous processes over the years. So I'd fully expect many of the features of core updates now to become more continuous over time. So if we zoom out and look at it in a kind of macro perspective, this isn't too much of a problem. We will be able to run normal SEO tests against all these factors in the fullness of time. I think that's a good thing as far as obviously a good thing as far as we're concerned, but I think it's a good thing as far as the industry is concerned, because this is our lens into that opaque process. This is the way that we pick apart what really matters and what doesn't, and we try and align our activities as marketers and webmasters and website owners with what searchers really want. And Google is just the kind of middleman in that process, and we kind of have to test against Google to check that we're moving in the right direction, but they're a proxy for all these things. And so any movement away from batch towards responsive is a good thing, but right now we're not in that situation. And so I think we do need to think about, how does SEO testing fit into a world of core updates? So the big pieces of the mindset that I advocate, I've listed them in this post here, is first of all, remember that even as core updates are going on around us, SEO testing is super valuable because you can improve in between times against all of the continuous processes, all those things that update in real time or in shorter time intervals. And the majority of updates aren't core batch updates either. So you've got kind of, I guess you can think of it as three levels. The continuous stuff that is just getting factored in all the time as the crawl continues, the indexing happens, the rendering happens, the link index is updated, etc., etc. You've got that's just continuous. That's happening as fast as Google can make it happen, and you're getting recrawled, and it's kind of basically there straight away. The next level up is the continuous changes. So the kind of continuing tweaking of all of the different variables that is going on at Google's end, which we never even hear about. These don't even reach the level of update. They're just continuous improvements. And then you have these more batch processes that, again, in my hypothesis, is that these are the retraining of deep learning models. And that's why they have to happen in a batch process. So first point is SEO testing remains valuable even in a world of core updates, because most things aren't core updates. With core updates, though, I think the big picture philosophical thing to realize is that what Google is trying to achieve with core updates is kind of more of the same. And I think the strongest evidence for this is just how anodyne all of the advice is about how to do better if you were adversely impacted by a core update. So if you go on Google's official documentation, or you can follow Search Liaison on Twitter, or look at the stuff that comes out from John Mueller or whoever, their advice is never more anodyne than when they're talking about recovery from a core update impact. It's think about users, create good content, make sure your website can be crawled. It's really, really basic stuff, and it's never aligned to anything more detailed than that when we're talking about an unnamed core update. Now, sometimes with the named ones, there will be a specific direction, right? If you were negatively impacted by the helpful content update, they're going to say the clue is in the name, and what you need to do is try and make your content more helpful. Now, some experts might disagree. We might get back to that idea that the name of the update isn't necessarily indicative of the actual real world impact, and maybe some collateral damage has taken place, and maybe there are some other things that you can do to help. But Google's line, at least, is going to stay this very anodyne, very kind of just make your website better. And so with some caveats that I'll come on to, that generally means that over the long run and over multiple core updates, the set of core updates as a whole is going to be a tailwind to winning tests. Google works deliberately in a way that it wants to right now, makes a sequence of core updates that push in more and more in the direction that they want. And that sequence of updates becomes a tailwind if you are a winner in between. So if you're continually getting wins day in, day out, making your site more and more what Google wants with some caveats, then the core updates become tailwind over time, but not necessarily monotonic and continuous. So we'll come back to that. But if the ideas were genuinely a good idea in between core updates, they'll become an even better idea over time. And I think that's the core idea. However, in the short run, there's a lot of noise in core updates. So Tom Capper, the same ex-colleague that I mentioned who wrote the Whiteboard Friday, wrote another article diving deep into how to think about core updates. And this was even longer ago than I wrote my article. This is based on a load of data that Tom had access to. And I'm not going to run through all of it just now. He goes into it in great detail. My post pulls out the bits that I think are most relevant to this. But the key thing is, can you do better than SEO testing in a world of core updates? And I think the answer is no. I think trying to be responsive to individual core updates is a bit of a losing game, because in the short run, it turns out to be that there's a lot of noise in individual core updates. Now, this may not be any consolation to the poor small site owner who is bobbing on the ocean of fluctuating rankings as these waves of core updates come along. But for larger sites, and if you can wait everything out, you are best off, in my opinion, in Tom's opinion, and a number of other people's opinion, not overreacting to the back and forth around individual updates. Again, with exceptions like this manual penalty or manual action against renting out subdomains and so forth. There, I think you definitely should take action. But aside from those exceptions, I don't think you should overreact to individual core updates. You need to be thinking about the North Star and the direction that you're going in. I like to think of this as Google's fine-tuning a machine, but what they're doing is they're doing that by overshooting a bit in successive opposite directions. A bit like tuning a stringed instrument, like a violin, if you've ever done that. You go a bit too far in order to come back, and that's how you realize where that knob should sit. And so evidence for this includes the fact, as Tom shows in his post, that the vast majority of sites that are affected by multiple core updates get a mixture of positive and negative impacts. Very, very few sites are just monotonically improving core update after core update after core update. The core updates themselves overshoot and come back. And what we need to do, therefore, is zoom out and look at that bigger picture. And the final thing I'm going to talk about today, although I do go into more points in this post that you can read, as I say, I'll tweet out the links and add them to the LinkedIn comments. The final point I'm going to talk about in the stream today is that this strengthens, in my opinion, the argument for default to deploy, which is a testing approach, mindset that we advocate at SearchPilot. And this is the argument that I've made, that we're doing business, not science. And what that means is there are times when science is appropriate. If you're looking to release a new drug to market, you're going to need to know to a lot of decimal places and with an awful lot of confidence exactly what the upsides and downsides of that activity are. But that's not exactly the reason why we run tests in a business environment. Here, we're not necessarily looking for certainty. In many cases, what we're looking for is speed of enhancement, speed of improvement compared to our competition. And what this argument boils down to in the context of what I'm talking about here today is that when I say we're doing business, not science, what I mean is that it can often make sense to deploy an inconclusive test if it is backed by a strong hypothesis. So if you have a strong hypothesis and the test turns out to be inconclusive, doesn't prove that there's a benefit, you may lean towards deploying it anyway. You just don't get the learning, you don't get the insight, you don't get the proof point, you don't get the accountability layer. The reason you might do that is because it points towards potential future results. And what you've done with your testing in that case, if you've got a strong hypothesis, if this is the kind of thing where you'd have probably deployed it if you didn't have testing, what you're mainly doing is you're testing to avoid harm. You're testing to make sure that it's unlikely that this particular change is going to cause a negative impact, because those changes you absolutely want to avoid and can be totally worth testing to avoid. Which this leads me into the caveats, one of which is about hypotheses. So the caveats to this argument are you do need to make good hypotheses. If you're testing to find loopholes, things that work right now, but are misaligned, shall we say, with Google's perspective, and you're looking to find those loopholes and then exploit them for a short time period, then you may get caught out by core updates in that case. Because you could easily end up in a local optimum where you found something that works right now, but it isn't backed by a user-centric hypothesis. And so Google is trying to close those loopholes as you're going along. So it works if you make good hypotheses. If you're making good hypotheses, then a default to deploy mindset works in this context of slight oscillations as they tune the violin string, as they improve those core updates over time. And the second caveat is that, as I mentioned earlier, you do need to watch out for the opinionated updates. It's, in my opinion, pretty likely that the large media sites that were targeted in this most recent release, where they were targeting these coupon subdomains, for example, they were probably right to react to Google's warnings about the impending update that was coming for them. I mean, they were almost named in the actual Google communications about it. And that's a very different thing to what I'm talking about here. Here I'm talking about the case where you're looking at this sequence of unnamed core updates or blandly named core updates, which don't point you to anything other than Google's generic day-to-day anodyne recommendations. And in those cases, I would advocate ignoring the individual core updates and not trying to read too much into whether you're a winner or a loser on an individual core update. Continue looking for those incremental wins with the testing, and occasionally step back and sense check that, you win some, you lose some, but you're gradually moving in the right direction over time as it comes to the core updates. If you want to get even further into the weeds, check out Tom's Whiteboard Friday, his other post that I mentioned, and this post that I've been pulling up here, which goes on to, I think, 6 different points and goes into a lot more detail about all of the things that I've talked about here today. And I'm going to, as I say, share all of those links. They will all be on Twitter and LinkedIn if you want to follow this up later. But I also have a bit more of a rapid fire round that I wanted to talk about a few things this week, cover off a few things that I've been reading or thinking about over the week. The first was, I don't know if you saw this story, but I wanted to share it because it's a silly story, but it's an example of untruths getting so much further than the truth that corrects them. So did you see the story that StatCounter reported Google losing big chunks of search market share in April, and Bing and Yahoo taking up the slack? And I just think there must have been people out there who saw the headline that this had happened and didn't see the correction, because the answer is, of course not. There may or may not be trends causing pressure in this direction over time, a little bit gradually, but there is absolutely no way that user behavior changed that precipitously in a single month. And so I tweeted out some stuff saying I'm happy to take the bet that this isn't real, but sure enough, it turned out to be an illusion, and StatCounter is looking into it. And so I saw some stats that StatCounter tracks obviously a pretty small percentage of all search traffic and all websites. And it's possible that, I guess, well, the non-tinfoil hat version would be that they maybe track some sites that were among the lower quality ones, or were, I guess the better version would be, unfortunately, adversely impacted by recent updates. And so those sites in the sample group got less traffic than in previous months from Google. And the others didn't change. Bing and Yahoo didn't change, and it looked like a percentage change from Google. And I'd actually be interested to see if what they've seen is a drop in total search traffic rather than actually and it's just changing, or is it just a changing blend? Because I don't think it's true that people suddenly stopped searching. Well, it's definitely not true that people suddenly stopped searching. The slightly more tinfoil hat version, I guess, would be Google saw the inclusion of StatCounter analytics as a negative signal, and those sites explicitly fell because they're in the sample set. I don't think that's probably true, but it potentially connects into some interesting things going on in the wider world. I don't think is it in Google's interest? I think there's an argument that says that there being media coverage of Google having a drop in search market share, people asking this question. Right now, could conceivably be good for Google. Hear me out. Because we're just getting to the end of the antitrust trial, the DOJ bringing their closing arguments at the end of last week. And Google is arguing that they do have a large market share, but they are not dominant in the way that they are often perceived. They always say, the competition is just a click away. Well, I mean, these headlines help them in that case, don't they? So, I don't know. I'm getting too tinfoil hat even for myself, but, I'd like to speculate from time to time. The point being, the arguments come down. We're waiting for the verdict. For us on the organic search side of things, this is mainly of interest because of the information that's been revealed during the trial. Most of the arguing here is about the search ads market, what used to be called AdWords. And that's not an area that I'm an expert in. I'm not going to comment on that, except to say the trial has released some fascinating documents. So this post here links to a Google sheet that categorizes tons of bits of data that came out in discovery. And it's an absolute goldmine of information that you can sort and filter by different bits of data here. And I need to do some more digging through this because I think it's really, really interesting. If you are more interested in the ads side of things, I also would recommend this post from Danny Goodwin, which outlines how Google is, I think we should say, how Google is alleged to harm search advertisers in 20 slides, but does include slides from the closing arguments of the trial. And there's definitely some fascinating stuff here. And some of you might know that I'm a massive auction geek. So some of this stuff from the actual academic side of the argument. There's where are we? Hal Varian, who's chief economist, making these are actual academic arguments about what is going on in the auction. I say I'm not an expert in AdWords or Google Ads or search ads, but I am an auction expert, and I do find this absolutely fascinating. So I'm not going to comment any more on how it pertains to the actual legal case because I'm also not a lawyer, but definitely an interesting read. In the pivoting to wrap up now, just a couple of other things that I know that people who are listening to this might also be interested in, some things I've been reading this week. So one in the category of things I want to dig deeper into is one of the most interesting presentations I saw at Brighton SEO was from, where are we? It's from Dan Taylor, who linked to one of his own articles, but also a bunch of other very interesting articles about better SEO reporting and better communication, better reporting in general with the C-suite and senior executives. And so there's a couple of Search Engine Land articles, Search Engine Journal article, and a one on LinkedIn, which I think were all worth checking out. And again, I'll link to all of them. But he also linked to some frameworks that I hadn't come across before. In particular, I hadn't come across this PESTLE analysis, which is analyzing factors through these different lenses: political, economic, sociological, technological, legal, and environmental. And I'm still thinking about this, but watch this space. It's definitely been prompting me to think more deeply about ways that we can get better at communicating all of our work to the most senior executives. Finally, for today, I wanted to recommend that if you're interested in all this stuff, you check out this article, which is really in depth. You can see the scroll bar up here. This is on the SearchPilot site, but it goes, there's a lot of content here. And this is from my colleague, Sam Nemza, and some of the rest of the team. And this is all about running a good experimentation program. And it's backed up by a couple of webinars about how to design effective SEO experimentation programs. This is part one. Part two is coming soon. So you can just click on this and head over to the landing page and sign up for the webinar in question. And this, I think, on the topic of communicating with the C-suite, this is a topic that those elusive C-suite folks are very keen on, in my experience. If you're struggling to get traction in your organization for SEO metrics, SEO performance in general, but want to do better, this is a way forward. Just like innovation, experimentation is one of those programs that somehow seems to find it easier to get budget, visibility, and I guess therefore results at many large companies. So again, all the stuff's going to be on Twitter and LinkedIn, but if you check out this article, and there's an embedded call to action to sign up for the webinar, which I think is going to go even deeper into all of this kind of content. And that's it, I think, for today. So if you want to join me for more of these, I go live most Tuesdays at 4:15 p.m. UK time, which is 11:15 a.m. on the East Coast, 8:15 a.m. on the West Coast. I go live on my Twitter and my LinkedIn, both of which I'm at Will Critchlow, as well as on the SearchPilot YouTube channel. You can also head over to searchpilot.com/live for tons of useful resources that explain some of the concepts I've used today. And you can use the form there if you'd like to talk to one of the SearchPilot team about how SEO testing could be improved or rolled out at your organization. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me. Have a great rest of your day, and drop me a line or hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn if you've got any questions or comments or other topics that you'd like to hear me talk about in future weeks. All right, take care.